Following President Trump's Davos address and today's EU pause on the U.S. trade deal, we're joined by geopolitical strategist and retired Lieutenant Colonel Darin Gaub, who served as a battalion commander and Black Hawk helicopter pilot in the U.S. Army as well. Good to have you with us today, Lieutenant Colonel Gaub. What do you make of the EU's pause on its trade deal over the U.S.'s Greenland tariff threat?
Good afternoon, Steph. No surprise at all. I mean, this is just, I guess you could call it the art of the deal. You can call it negotiations. You can call it diplomacy. It's kind of all the above. There is no surprise at all that Europe would take a step back from something that we're looking forward to based on what's happening with the discussion around Greenland. There are clearly some messaging issues with Greenland itself that is causing part of this problem. And Trump finally said today that he didn't see any need to use the military involving Greenland, but frankly, there was never a need to use military involving Greenland. So that's part of the issue is cleaning up exactly what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and the how. And it should be based mostly on economics and trade. Military should never have been part of the equation anyways.
And how do you expect Trump to respond to this pause in the agreement that was already forged and just kind of going ahead?
Well, I think he already kind of put it out there anyways, which was starting off with the 10% tariffs and growing to 25% tariffs come June if that plan stays in place. I think he got ahead of the EU in anticipation of them thinking that they would do this anyways. So again, not a surprise that it happened, and also we'll see if the tariff threat is enough to see if it'll turn around. But I truly think that some of the more closed door sessions and backroom deals that are getting worked in Davos and elsewhere are where you're going to find the actual solutions to this, rather than generally what is put out in public.
Do you think the president can affect what he said in his speech was needed in regards to Greenland? Right, title, and ownership, so that the U.S. can properly defend the island in the case of an attack. Do you think that can be achieved through economic means?
I think it's the best chance of achieving that, because outside of that, right now, what you've got is an unfortunate threat of military activity, which is completely unnecessary. And frankly, there are other means to be able to use Greenland's mass and size for what we're trying to achieve in the first place. It doesn't involve necessarily owning and titleship. It could involve leases and various other means to do things. So, and that's me talking directly to the people in Denmark in my coalition that I have worldwide. They know that, and it's disconcerting to them that this discussion seems to have been focused around military use of force potential, or real or imagined, I guess you could say. Can we do it? Yes, if they agree. And frankly, the whole thing should be done based on economics and buying power and nothing else.
And the president laid out plans to build a missile defense dome on Greenland, which he has had for some time. Why is that so important to him right now?
Well, there are many threats leveled against the United States, and one of those is, of course, the ability to reach us via intercontinental ballistic missiles. When you look at places like Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia, and China specifically has such a growing nuclear arsenal, the ability to advertise and demonstrate the effectiveness of a Golden Dome could sway some of those debates, because now we're well defended. And all Greenland does is extend the reach of such a type of a dome out further geographically from the mainland United States. And that could be a good thing. It's just the question of how we get there. There are other means to do it besides owning Greenland ourselves. We can work with NATO allies to do that, because frankly, if you get a dome like that that's big enough, we're defending them anyways, either by making sure that we aren't impacted directly because we're such the main force behind NATO, or actually being able. Basically, it's going to look kind of like NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense, but a whole lot bigger and covering a whole lot more ground.
And we are seeing a new mega embassy approved for China in London, and the Prime Minister is set to visit the regime's leader soon in Beijing. How do you see the European leaders' response to Trump at this point in time in the context of their other interests, such as in regards to China?
I think in some way what you're seeing is Europe showing its colors a little bit right now, regardless of who's in the White House. It's the fact that China in is coddling up to many of the allies that we would say we have in Europe. And frankly, the trade deal they just are looking at with Canada right now is also not a good thing either. So China is continuing to try to reach into areas where America has historically had a significant amount of influence. And while Europe seems to be turning away from greater liberty and more towards authoritarianism and policing of its own people, it's natural that they would have a quasi-attraction to what China represents, not only in political ideology, but in their desire to continue to use their economics to grow and to dominate other regions of the world. So Europe constantly reaching out to someone like a China is not a good sign for what is actually happening on the ground, which is a turn towards less freedom.
And on that point, China's population numbers came out recently, and it's really getting decimated. Internally, Xi Jinping's trying to position himself as a kind of stable alternative to President Trump, as you mentioned, in terms of being an international partner. But how much do you think these recent tensions and those other alliances could see a kind of sway towards China? Also, we saw Canada's Mark Carney saying that he asked China's Xi about human rights abuses privately in their meeting rather than publicly, because that causes tension with the regime's leader. And that is an approach that so many leaders take with the regime's leader. How do you see these things as perhaps a kind of kowtowing to the regime? And just lastly, anything that could shift that in your view?
Sure. I think one of the things that could shift it would be the fact that China has such a demographic challenge with their massive downturn in population growth. And frankly, it's also a result of how much they locked their own people down in COVID and how many deaths were suffered as a result, plus their one-child policy. This was totally expected, and I still think they're probably over-advertising their overall population growth and current numbers. And so they know that, frankly, between that, the internal fights they've had between their leadership, Xi and some of his military leaders, is their loss of buying power with their currency evaluations and their real estate problems. What they're trying to do is, claim a stability and be more quiet to give people the perspective that they are stable when they are not at all. And if they are able to sufficiently convince the world that they are stable, then they'll look to they could be looked at. China could be looked at as a force worth investing in or becoming a partner with, rather than the reality, which is they are completely an unstable nation that has many of its own challenges and problems. America is looked at as different because we tend to be a little bit louder, I guess, right now than people are used to, and that makes them wonder, even though in many cases we're identifying the correct problem and recognizing that China still remains a big threat, frankly, to itself and its own people and to many nations around the world.
Well, great to have your insights today. Thank you so much for your time, Lieutenant Colonel Gaub.
Yeah, thanks, Steph.